Several draft policies to consider this afternoon. The first one up is Draft Policy 2014-8, alignment of 8.3 needs requirements to the reality of business. Kevin Bloomberg, come on up.
Hello, everybody. So our intent is to abandon this proposal. We've spoken with the author, who is in agreement, and the reasoning behind that, and I really wanted to talk about that more, the reasoning why we're looking to abandon. Some things have come up recently that have simplified some of the issues that they were concerned about. There have been other policies that more surgically deal with this issue and make it simpler for end users and ISPs who are needing space in the transfer market to be able to do that. One of them was discussed earlier, lowering everything to /24 as an example will make it simpler. The biggest concern with this policy is that it tries to solve the problem by removing out most of the policy by saying under current ARIN policies, i.e. you can do a transfer, but the only requirement is the 24 months. And it basically took a big swath of removing out all other policy except for the 24-month requirement. When you try to add in specifics rather than taking out everything into 8.3, it actually really complicates 8.3. And so I'd like to hear if there's anybody who is concerned about letting this policy go. One of the pieces of feedback was that at this time, this policy should probably be abandoned, but it is good once we get closer or after run out to revisit this, that if more simplification is needed, that will be the right time, but right now there isn't enough data. And again, the biggest concern was new entrant, and by lowering and by getting community support to lower the allocation sizes to 24 as an example, that definitely helps a significant amount with new entrant issues. So if there's anybody who is in favor of abandoning or who is opposed to abandoning this, more importantly, by all means, please come up to the mic. I'd love your feedback.
Thank you, Kevin. So if you, as Kevin intended, mentioned, the AC is planning to abandon, or that seems to be their track. So we'd love to hear whether the community supports or does not support this potential course of action. First speaker.
Scott Librand, ARIN AC. I'm probably one of the people that Kevin was talking about who thinks that we should go ahead and abandon this, but we need to revisit simplifying NRPM Section 4 in light of runout. Given that, there are a number of efforts going on in that space already, but I think we need more effort there. There's a lot of you in this room who are very good at reading the NRPM and figuring out all the things that are wrong with it. There's also a number of you who are previous policy authors or have contributed to actual text. I think we need more community input on as far as actual proposals to clean up and fix Section 4 of the NRPM in light of the situation after runout. So I would encourage people to think about, not necessarily fire off a proposal today, but think about proposals to that would go into effect when there is no more free pool. And think about when there is no more free pool, which things, like this author tried to do, which things are no longer relevant and should be removed. And if you can do that in a simple bite-sized manner, I think that would be a good input into the policy development process and allow the AC to do a lot of the work that this is trying to do.
Thank you, Scott, for that intervention. So encourage obviously those to submit to the policy process, but on the specific matter before us, does anybody wish to comment? Going once? Going twice? My phone is vibrating to the same thing. Going 3 times. Seeing no more participants or no views, I think that we can consider that as input to the AC. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, very good. Next up, we're going to cover draft policy 2014-9. Eight?
Nine. Yep. You were right, I was wrong, as usual.
Okay. And this policy proposal is resolve conflict between RSA and 8.2 utilization requirements. And the presentation will be given by Scott Librand.
Hello again. So the problem statement here centers around the fact that 8.2 transfer policy says that if you're not using space at the time of a merger and acquisition, that ARIN should do one of several things, one of which is to reclaim that space. However, the RSA, which is a legal document between anyone who has recently, within the last decade, acquired space and or has brought space under the agreement, explicitly prohibits ARIN from reclaiming space just because it's not utilized. So there's a direct conflict between our policy manual and a legal document. Legal documents control, so this portion of the policy manual is not enforceable. It's a direct conflict. So this proposes to fix that. It does so in order to solve a couple of problems. One is that conflict I just mentioned. That's item 2. Another is who is accuracy. So there's a concern among a lot of people who want to do mergers and acquisitions that if they don't have all their documentation perfect and they can't get ARIN to execute the thing completely, that there's a risk that they'll lose their space. And a lot of us who are involved in the process say, no, the RSA says you can't lose your space just for that, but people don't know that. So this is perceived as something that prevents people from finishing up transfers when they get difficult. So the idea here is by removing the threat of reclamation, which is an empty threat, we will remove the perception of a problem and will encourage people to finish up their transfers. It also, the current way the text is written is to remove the word aggregate, which was referencing some sections of the NRPM that just got removed, and so therefore that there's no way in the policy manual to do the aggregation anymore, and there's no need to reference it here. So this actual proposed solution is now really simple. The original version of this proposed striking the whole thing, but instead, the current version of this, based on feedback from the community, is that we should simply remove the words aggregate, and reclaim from this portion of the text. So that leaves just return or transfer. So if someone wants to voluntarily return space to ARIN, they may. Otherwise, ARIN will work with them to get them to transfer any space they don't need after a merger and acquisition to someone who does need it. And obviously they can do that with whomever they like on any reasonable time frame, and that will be fine under this policy. So, do you agree that this is solving a real problem, that the problem statement is valid? And do you support removing the words aggregate and return to resolve that conflict? Or do you have any other suggestions? And if you're opposed, what concerns do you have? And there's more details here that I'm not going to go into unless people have specific questions.
One more thing, so to speak. So again, draft policy. We need your feedback. Don't rush all at once. Go ahead.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire, and AC. Question, I do support this proposal. What happens if it doesn't happen? Does the NRPM then dictate you to make changes to an RSA down the road, or?
The RSA takes precedence, is under control of the Board of the Trustees. When we're very close now to having an identical RSA and LRSA. The only difference is the fee schedule in all material aspects. When we did that, the right that we extended to LRSA holders, which was that you would not have your resources claimed totally for lack of use, was extended to RSA holders. So that takes precedence over the NRPM. And there's no way to have an equitable treatment of all ARIN's customers without doing that. So if this doesn't happen, all it means is there's language in NRPM that we know is non-effective.
I guess what I'm asking, John, is if the community has reaffirmed something in this particular case by saying, no, don't do it, would ARIN be required then to look at the RSA and see if they could make the adjustments to the RSA to fit the NRPM, or is it always the other way around?
The changes to the RSA don't happen because of changes to NRPM. They're initiated because the community contacts the board or at a member meeting and says, we want a change to happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Mike Joseph Google, just an observation from my colleague. I would suggest that revising that section of the RSA would likely be problematic. I would be surprised if I saw that changing, I would think. In any case, on the topic at hand, I support this proposal.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Looked like there was more coming. Last call. Once, twice, three. Oh, no, we're all closed. Sorry, no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
David Farmer, University of Minnesota, ARIN AC. I support the policy as written. I also support continued thought in the community as to whether this section is even necessary, but I think this is a first start. Get rid of the blatantly conflicting text and then further
Yep.
consideration.
Different
Thank you.
problem statement, but good point. Last call for real this time. Once, twice, three times. Seeing no remote participants and seeing no one approach the mic, we'll pass this feedback on to the AC. Thank you very much. And thank you, Scott.
Okay, next up, we have the Draft Policy 2014-11, Improved Registry Accuracy Proposal. This is also a draft policy and still being worked on by the AC. And I will have Kevin Bloomberg come up and present it. Oh, yeah. As I mentioned earlier, there's some other work relevant to this. It's again with respect to the RSA and the LRSA. We've accumulated over the last year and a half since the last RSA and LRSA, we've accumulated a long list of comments from the community regarding possible improvements. And some of these are fairly problematic. Example is, no matter what you do with your IP addresses, we can't have a circumstance where you come and sue ARIN for damages that would eliminate the entire registry because of something we and you did. It just you use those addresses at your risk. We don't endanger the rest of the community because you use the addresses. Even if ARIN gets something wrong, we don't endanger the registry. So some of the changes that we've collected, I nod up and down to and I go, yep, thank you, and I've discussed with the board, and they're not going to go anywhere. But there's a list of changes that we think are worthwhile and we're looking into. And this includes making it clearer what services we provide to people. As I said earlier in the day, you can sort of squint one eye and look and see there's a mention of services in the RSA, but there's no delineation of them. So it's not clear that we provide what is registry services. And this is particularly apt because we provide services to both resource holders under contract and parties not under contract. So right now we're on a project to clean this up and discuss it with the board and try to figure out if we can get a clearer statement of services provided. If that were the case, I think it overlaps heavily the language of this policy proposal. So,
Thank you.
any questions on my monologue there? Okay.
So, thank you, John. One of the things we've been looking at over the last, I guess, 2.5 months since the last ARIN meeting in Chicago was how to look at this policy proposal and deal with the fact that many of the requests in the policy, in the problem statement, were related to contractual issues between ARIN and the address block holder. And we can't really do that, as was previously talked about, where we can't override something that is in the RSA within the NRPM. That just wouldn't work. So there's been a lot of discussion back and forth, and very recently I heard that actually no, there's some active work being done to look at the RSA and LRSA, which puts us in an interesting situation of what should we do with this policy. So the policy, the intent of the policy was to get more accurate registry information by dealing with some legacy issues, non-contracted legacy issues, and getting these people in the fold as easy as possible, to make it as easy as possible. But most of the way of doing that would not actually be through the NRPM. So we looked at cleaning it up and how to clean it up. My recommendation is going to be to hold off on this policy, to keep going as a draft, to keep refining some of the things that we're doing. We're looking at adding in definitions for what legacy is, because there are no definitions today within the NRPM, and potentially spelling out within the NRPM some of the services that are available, or some of the aspects that are specific to legacy that we do need to document that might have been historical, but it's good to have it within the NRPM so that people just know where they sit, and it's not a nod and a wink. It's actually there for them to feel comfortable with. But to do that without understanding what the changes to the RSA are is kind of premature. I don't feel we should abandon, because I do think we should be working on this, but at the same time, I think without seeing what's going to happen, it's kind of premature to continue work. There was a lot of disagreement in Chicago in terms of the aspects of this proposal, but we wanted to get your feedback. Should we actively, sort of rapidly work on this? Should we wait to see what happens with the RSA? Or should we abandon this and deal with this proposal later on? And if anybody has any feedback on that, I'd really appreciate it.
Okay, you all by now know the drill. Maybe not, no? We're looking for feedback on draft policy ARIN 2014-11. Those that would like to discuss whether or not this is a problem statement worth solving, or the effort so far. Go right ahead.
Mike Joseph, Google. We oppose this. I oppose this policy as written. Yeah, I think it does seem to be redundant with the work that's being undertaken by John and the board. I also think it adds a lot of unclear definitions to the NRPM, particularly a slippery slope where we may start to invite the opportunity for further differentiation between legacy and non-legacy space holders. And I think that that's largely inappropriate for the NRPM. It's my opinion that the type of services provided by ARIN are more properly determined through contracts, through ARIN's operating procedures, and through the board. This is not such a matter of policy. I think, in fact, that we ought to strive to have unified policy for all holders of address space, regardless of the contractual nature of those space holders. So I oppose this policy.
And your opposition is that you believe this is best done at the board level? You don't think there's
Well,
something that could be changed?
I have two reasons I oppose. On the services point, that's best done through the board and through ARIN suggestions and the other ARIN operational forums. On the policy language, I think it introduces dangerous definitions into the NRPM.
Okay. Kevin, just like to ask a quick question.
Mike, do you believe we should continue working on this, or that this policy should be abandoned?
No,
as-
I believe this should be abandoned or at least put on hold in favor of determining the work that John has stated will be done most expeditiously, apparently. Possibly before you could even blink an eye as a slow AC member. John states that this policy might be or the services document might be done.
AC are people too.
I was alluding only to John's previous comment about the speed at which he promises the services document.
Understood. Thank you for the feedback.
And while we are working expeditiously, it is also something to be discussed with the board that needs to look at the overall. So it is going to move promptly, but it is a joint activity.
And I
if
would
you thought
hope
the
that
AC was slow. Wait till you see that board. No. Sorry, Mike. Go ahead.
And I would hope that the board and Aaron would invite input on that process through the appropriate forums, but probably not this one.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good comment. Okay, if there's no one else who wishes to comment, we'll close the mic. Seeing no remote participant or people approach. Go ahead, sir.
Bob Evans, Fiber Internet Center. Sorry about my voice. I was under a speaker last night. So, as a good net citizen, several legacy holders, of course, also, SWIP who they've got running the IP addresses. And I think that makes it easy for all of us to then find spammers and lock them out of the network. If the way I read this so far, it's just unclear which services are going to be what. If that is removed somehow from a legacy holder, I think it's going to be harmful to the community as a whole. I just want to make sure that, because it's like he said, it opens things up.
So let me respond. The services that we offer to the legacy holders and to the non-legacy holders are very similar. The only place we found a material difference isn't in the areas of SWIP, but it's in the area of RPKI, and it actually doesn't have to do with the costs per se as much as it's awkward for Aaron to be representing registry accuracy on a party that we haven't actually vetted and put under an agreement. So, but I don't expect it to affect SWIP.
I think to address that, you have to go back to the formation of ARIN and what was the intent at the time that the NSA and everybody handed everything over. So maybe it's a board decision. There you go. Thank you.
NSF, I think we meant. Okay, if there's no further comments, we will wrap this one up. Thank you very much. Oh, oh, my apologies. So we are going to do our audience participation after a good coffee break. It's time to stretch those arms once. Leslie, I'm stalling here. Come on. I'm just saying. All right. Just kidding, Leslie. So the same question as before. I'm going to ask first for those in favor of abandonment, in other words, not proceeding, and those that are opposed to abandonment. So those who are in favor of abandoning draft policy ARIN-2014-17 improved registry accuracy policy, please raise your hands or some other limb high. High, and keep it up, please. I saw a half hand. Thank you. We need to count it. But if you don't keep it up, then it doesn't get counted. Sorry. Okay, you can lower. Dave, you're not voting there. You're just kind of adjusting. Sorry, you kind of had your hand go up half. Those who are opposed to abandonment, please raise your hand. And remote participants, if you can please, if you have not done so already, signal your vote. Some very complex tabulation is occurring. Okay, I think for a caffeine break, we seem to have been slowing down here. So on the matter of 2014-11, those in favor of abandonment 4, those opposed to abandonment 2, and in the room and on remote is 45. We'll provide that input to the AC for their consideration. Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have draft policy 2014-14, which is removing needs from the small IPv4 transfers. I'll have John Springer come up and do the AC presentation.
Okay, so in Chicago, the results of a professional survey were presented, and Leslie made some comments about ARIN staffing. And this draft policy is the result. For it to go from a policy proposal to a draft policy, it needed to satisfy only two requirements. It needed to have a clear problem statement and be in scope for the advisory council. So the problem statement, we worked with the author a bit on this to make sure that it was fairly narrowly crafted. ARIN staff, faced with a surge in near exhaust allocations and subsequent transfer requests and a requirement for team review of these, is spending scarce staff time on needs testing of small transfers. This proposal seeks to decrease overall ARIN processing time through elimination of that needs test. The reason the survey is pertinent is that one of our biggest areas of opportunity in ARIN is possibly to reduce this processing time. Relatively simple policy statement. There's identical text in sections 8.3 and 8.4. We're going to replace the existing text, which is the from section, with the to section. I advise a careful reading of the to section, but it's because it's kind of worded in a negative way. It is written to concern transfers larger than a 16 and effect transfers smaller than a 16. Needs testing has been maintained for transfer for a number of reasons over the years, some of which include the community likes to ensure protection against hoarding and speculation in the V4 market. This proposal seeks a middle ground between the elimination of needs tests for transfers altogether, which we have seen has happened in other places, and the continuation of needs tests for every transfers, which implies continuing lengthy processing times for ARIN services. Pros. Specifically, the policy seeks to reduce ARIN staff processing time for small allocations. There's been a considerable amount of back and forth on the list about this. Quite a bit of discussion about whether or not a 16 is a small allocation. Leslie had some figures earlier in the week that indicated that of the total number of transfers that has taken place to date, roughly half of them are larger than 16 and roughly half are smaller. So clearly, with that as a metric, this draft policy, if implemented, would have an effect. There's also been the mention, everybody's always aware that the small entrants, people that need a 24, have a hard time with that. This would probably ease that, although that is not a specific intent of the draft policy. Also, there's a perceived unfairness with a lot of small operators that are seeking PI resources. And this might coincidentally increase WHOIS accuracy to the extent that we're able to get some resources registered in an accurate manner. Like I say, there's been a considerable amount of discussion on PPML about this. A lot of it has revolved around the question of what is small. Is 16 too big? Is 24 too small? One correspondent raised some, what I thought were fairly pertinent points about how to assess success. Another comment was proposing that a graduated approach might be more appropriate than just doing it blankly on a 16. And then I'll leave that last comment for reference if I need it later. So where this is in the process, the Advisory Council has accepted it as draft policy. For it to proceed, it needs to satisfy 3 tests that I mentioned earlier. It needs to enable fair and impartial number policy, it needs to be technically sound, and it needs to have support in the community. I need input from this group about those matters. Absence of support is pretty drastic. Absence of any of the other 2, equally drastic. I intend, in working with the author, this is a fairly narrowly crafted thing. The author has expressed a willingness to play with the math, and there is some interest apparently for doing that, adjusting that 16 in some direction or another. I hope that the policy can be worked on between now and October and presented in Baltimore, because this is a perennial subject that keeps coming up. And you know, there's people that want something to be done about the needs basis, and then there are people who do not want something to do about the needs basis. In the past, it's been a challenge to try and obtain a narrow enough framing on this to be reasonable about it. And I think this might be a good opportunity for that. But anyway, I throw the floor open and ask for comments.
You beat me to it, so go for it, sir.
I had to speed it up.
I'm trying.
All right.
Go ahead, sir.
Bob Evans, Fiber Internet Center. I kind of see this as a Trojan horse. I love the fact that, you know, there's a paperwork reduction act within this proposal here. But at the same time, the /16 is way too big to be considered small. One of the reasons is, and a lot of us are old enough to remember what the Hunt brothers did with silver when it became a real commodity. And I think we're opening ourselves up to the same thing. I think it's going to be very unfair for smaller ISPs as somebody goes around and figures out how to get /16s and transfer them to their little network in Dubai. And there's a lot of stuff if you're going to move something that big. But I'm totally in favor of speeding up the Paperwork Reduction Act, of lowering it to, say, a 20 or something like that would be ideal. And I think there's just too many opportunities to corner the market on stuff like this, because it's going to be what's available in the private sector marketplace, and that gets scooped up, and then the prices of IP addresses will go way up, and then you're going to have the smaller ISPs harmed, even if they have to go to that market after ARIN's exhausted them. While ARIN's been able to keep, in fact, if you think about it, the price of IP address space reasonable by still having some, when it runs out, that's not going to be true. The second point is, you can say, oh, well, we have a hammer at ARIN and we can tell them this isn't right. And then they're going to say, oh, we have a venture fund and a hedge fund over here with a lot more lawyers in it. And then you're going to stop all transfers, and that's going to then hurt the small guy again. So this affects the market quite a bit for smaller ISPs if you make it a /16.
So you're not supportive as is, but you could be supportive if the 16 was replaced to a 20.
Put it back to what really is small, a 20.
Don't run away. Mr. John had a question as well.
So my intention with this is to take the results of this meeting back to the list. And like I say, there was a pretty frank exchange of views on the list. And the issue of the 20 threshold will definitely be taken up there. And I look forward to your comments when that takes place.
I didn't get to see the information you referred to earlier about the 50-50, 50% larger than a 16, 50% smaller than a 16. So what was the number used? How many transfers was that?
I'll need to develop that information further. That was just a swag
So,
through the data.
so we're swagging this stuff to us, are we? I mean, was it 100? Was it 200? Was it 1,000? Does anybody know? Because we shouldn't refer
Leslie
to
can
it.
comment. But microphone, I hate to do it to you, but
So we completed roughly 72 8.3 transfers, and 39 of them were /16 and over. Larger.
More IP
39 would have been
addresses,
caught
yeah.
by this.
Big numbers, right. And 256 IP addresses is not small. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Joe Provo, Google. I oppose this strongly on at least 3 points, maybe more if I can think of them. One, I guarantee you that 100% of your transfers will be less than whatever bar it is if you make needs based go away for a certain bar. People merely manipulate their requests, stage them, what have you. Number two, the entire point of IP addressing, while markets and whatnot are nice, the entire point is utilization and actually providing service. That is a need. If we eliminate needs-based, then we basically said we're really in a derivatives game. That's it. And third, that con right there, we the final one, the rule-breaking behavior, we're essentially saying that, yeah, all this policy process is nice and all, but we're just going to roll over to what people do. That's it.
Thank you for, okay, opposed, next.
Christoph Blecker, Disney Interactive. I am not in support of it as a /16.
Okay.
I'd be open to supporting it as a /20. And the reason is, and I think it's a very important part of that text, is that the relief from needs basis is only for the first transfer in a 12-month period. If somebody's going back and like staging these out, they have to wait another year before
Or do the needs.
Yeah, they either need to prove needs, or they need to wait a year before they can do another needs-free transfer. So that paired with lowering the bar to a /20, I would find that I'd be open to supporting that.
So not as written, but supportive at a 20.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker.
Mike Joseph, Google. Unsurprisingly, I oppose this. And I would oppose it at any bar.
Understood.
I don't think that there, as my colleague earlier pointed out, you choose a 24, people will simply transfer a series of 24s.
Even given the context that was previously put, that they'd have to wait?
They wouldn't wait. They would have subsidiaries.
Okay.
And then the argument about the who is being accurate is such a red herring. That's the argument that's thrown up every time we talk about implementing proper policy, that if we implement policy, people will simply not comply with it. If we have a compliance problem, we ought to deal with that. But watering down our policy in favor of essentially becoming just a recorder of deeds is not where ARIN ought to be going, in my opinion. So I strongly oppose this policy as written and in any future revision.
Fundamentally opposed.
Indeed.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I'd ask if you're going to speak that you approach a microphone now or start typing, because we're going to close the microphones very, very shortly. Next speaker, please.
David Huber from Microsoft. I'd like to ask the audience to get their heads out of the sand and come back to the real world and out of La La Land. Guys,
Let's be respectful here.
Guys. Turn off his microphone. Yeah. Guys, this is going to happen. It's already happening. I don't want to use my example because I'm a big company with a lot of money and that's not fair. But if I work,
Dave, could you you're also just hard to hear, but could you?
if I work at
please?
a network that has some money, and I need IP addresses, and I can't go to the registries, I'm going to go buy the IP addresses that I can afford to buy for whatever period of time I choose to buy them. I might go buy a 1-year supply. I might go buy a 2-year supply. I might have the money and the resources and the interest, the engineering interest, to go buy a 5-year supply. And I'm going to go do that. And it doesn't matter what Aaron's rules say. I'm going to go do it because my responsibility is to run my network, to my company, for my customers. I'm running a network, and Aaron is irrelevant to that because it doesn't matter if who says that or not. It matters that I can use them. So if we believe that policy for the sake of enforcing utilization is really important, then I don't know how you reconcile it with the fact that when there's no IP addresses left in the well, V4 addresses left in the well, and I need more V4 addresses, I'm going to go and buy them, and nothing's going to stop me.
I think we're kind of veering a little bit off here, but I'll let John maybe
veering
address that.
off. It's
Well,
germane
you're
to
kinda
the
getting
whole
into the-
idea of needs basis.
I just want to ask a question. In the case where the addresses are registered to another entity,
Yeah,
but you believe you've acquired the rights to them,
yeah.
your assumption that the registration doesn't matter would be predicated on
The fact
if
that
you
my
wrote, if you
providers
wrote
and
them.
peers are going to listen to what I export to them.
Wait, I got a whole question coming. At the point in time when you wrote them, even
Mm-hmm.
though they're listed to another entity, that other parties would accept those routes.
Yes.
Okay. And I guess the question is, that's certainly true for some entities, but do you believe it's universally true?
I believe that in the real world in 2014, with your relationships with your peers and your transit providers today, when you tell them you're announcing something and you have that authority, you're going to do it. Some people require letters of agency. And I get that letter of agency from XYZ Corporation, whose addresses I bought. And that's it.
The only challenge with that assumption is that in a lot of cases, those addresses haven't been updated in 10 or 15 years, and anybody can scribe a letter of agency.
Yes.
So I guess my question would be, what assumptions you're saying it doesn't matter what it's registered as. Following that, I guess I'd just like to know the assumptions. Your assumptions are that it doesn't matter to anyone, not it just does, or it doesn't matter to the biggest corporations.
I think to the buyer of the addresses, with absolutely with the assumption that you've done your proper due diligence, that you're buying IP addresses from someone who really is the registrant. It says XYZ and who is, and you are buying from XYZ. It's not a high bar to clear to buy the addresses from XYZ and to get your peers and your providers to route it with whatever paperwork those peers and providers want to see, which in many cases is none.
And it's not a high bar if you're a multinational network, or it's not a high bar for everyone.
No, I don't think it's a high bar. I don't think it's a particularly complex legal transaction. I don't think it's a particularly complex engineering transaction.
The reason I ask, and just for comparison,
I
because
think
you're
it's a small
speaking
bar.
from a perspective, is we've heard from smaller providers that under those circumstances, they don't have the clout or authority to get those addresses routed even with an LOA because it's not accepted by their much larger peers. So I'm just asking whether or not your view is based on the particular peering power of one particular group of community.
Well, I do. I know. I understand. I represent a multinational large corporation, but I did spend 10 years dealing with mostly small folks, and I never got that sense. I don't want to speak contrary to what other people's real experiences are, but that's never been my knowledge in my industry.
That was my question. Thanks.
Okay, input taken. I think we need to kind of get back to the concept of whether removing needs tests for small IPv transfers is a policy worth working on.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire, ARIN AC. If ARIN has a staffing issue, I don't see why we're putting it into a policy to deal with the staffing issue, which is what the original intent was. But that being said, my issue is the ramifications of this abuse we've talked about earlier from some other colleagues. The fact that we are, correct me if I'm now wrong, if this were to be implemented outside of compliance with the Inter-RIR compatible needs-based policies, because we would be removing needs from a segment, and the question would be now become, are we in a compatible situation with the other RIRs we are doing it with?
Two very separate questions there, I heard.
Yes?
Let's deal with the second first, which is the compatibility, and then we'll come back to the first, which John would like to address. Springer.
Recognize that other RIR's compatibility requirements are very low, so we probably would not have any difficulty there with respect to that. The first question regarding whether there's a staffing problem, I am unaware of any staffing problem with ARIN. I will say compliance ultimately, though, as we just discussed, is about people actually paying attention to their routing and peering. It's anchored in the community, not in ARIN. We can do a lot to make sure that the records are accurate, but at the end of the day, you folks have to decide how important those records are.
Thank you.
John?
So one of my initial impressions of this was that it was out of scope for ARIN to be concerned with staffing measures, and I was informed that it definitely is.
It was more an observation. The last part to all of this for me is, if we want to simplify the needs test, let's simplify the needs test. Eradicating the needs test before simplification, I think, is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And John, to your final note, an LOA is useless for me as a small provider. Without the ARIN record showing that I am in fact the owner, none of my upstreams would touch me.
Okay, we're running a little time, so two things. First of all, after the remote participant comment has been read, the microphones will be closed, so if you're not standing in line by the time the end of the comment, that'll be the cutoff, and I'd ask that the remaining comments be succinct if possible. Thank you. Go ahead.
This is a remote comment by Jason Schiller of Google. There are many organizations that play by ARIN's rules who will engage in this practice if they can do so and not be on the black market, and have legal grounds to moderate disputes of use. Passing this policy will promote this behavior.
Did he indicate support or opposition clearly, or?
He did not use the words support or oppose, and I'm watching in the chat room, he opposes this.
Thank you. Last two comments?
Tony Hayden. So I guess from a ask the question here perspective, consistency of policy across resources, how would the V6 version of this policy be written? I'm basically going to oppose this as written because I can't imagine a version of it that could be built for IPv6. And if we don't have consistency, what are we doing here?
I was going to say that transfers right now are not even contemplated under IPv6, so I think that would be a broader topic. I take your point, other than the whole topic has not been contemplated. So
it has been contemplated by some.
Whether it has not been addressed is maybe the word there.
Yes.
At present, the present resource transfer policy starts out with, in addition to transfers under Section 8.2, IPv4 numbers and ASNs may be transferred. So we currently do not have a specified transfer policy for V6.
Yes.
So changing the needs test for a policy that doesn't exist.
I understand, but fundamentally, you're removing needs tests for small. If I'm thinking about that in a context of IPv6, what's small? And what's a needs? Well, it's a needs test today, but we're on the slope. And so I'm going to oppose this as written.
Sorry, oppose as written?
Yes.
Thank you.
Andrew Dahl, ARIN-AC, not speaking as the secondary shepherd on this policy, of which I am. I think the question that we are debating here is much larger than the actual problem statement that is postulated, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But the word need is a very loaded word in this context, and I think there's a very wide variety of what need means, and what need should mean after the V4 runout is something that we need to address in a larger context by understanding what type of marketplace we want to have in the long run for address transfers. And while I think this policy has opened the door to that discussion, I don't believe that we want to create another dual class type of arrangement where there are certain blocks that are allowed to be transferred without a need and others that must require one. So we previously just discussed about how we are dealing with the legacy, non-legacy issue now, still 15 years later. I don't want to create another class of issues by making another bifurcation in our policy. So I think we need to be consistent on what we do in the post V4 world, regardless of the size of the box. So I oppose this as written currently.
Thank you. Hold on, John.
Well, I don't have a comment directly to Andrew, but thank you for that, Andrew. So the immediate thing that I plan to do with this is to take it back to the list. There are ways that statements can be made in this type of a venue, which more or less, in my opinion, require to be carefully considered and analyzed and evaluated for a number of different things. So that's what I intend to do with this, and I thank everyone for your inputs.
Thank you very much. That ends that policy, so we'll move on to the next one. John?
Okay, next up is ARIN Policy 2014-15, allow Inter-RIR ASN transfers. Scott Librand.
This may look familiar. We already allow transfers of ASNs within the ARIN region. We had a proposal to do so between regions in 2013, called 2013-1. That proposal was recommended for adoption and consulted with the community, and a bunch of people said, what's the point? Nobody else, no other RIRs can do ASN transfers, so this policy would be one-hand clapping. So we abandoned it at that point, intending to pick it back up if any other RIRs adopted a policy proposal for ASN transfers. APNIC has done so. So therefore, we had a community member who brought back the 2013-1 text as it was on the website and proposed that to be put back into the process. That text is here in red and black. In making this presentation, I also noticed that a previous version of the presentation had some additional corrections that never made it to the version that he used for starting this, and those are in blue. They simply clarify that we're not saying if you get an ASN transfer, that means you can't get a V4 transfer. No, you can get a transfer of either resource according to these conditions. That's fine. So this is a pretty simple proposal. It basically adds the words or ASNs to the Inter-RIR transfer policy and then cleans up a couple of things. So having brought this back into the process, we are looking for feedback from the community as to whether this text is the right way to move forward with this. If you support the idea of allowing Inter-RIR ASN transfers, if you don't support it, do you oppose it or do you just not care, in which case you don't have to get up. But particularly we'd like to know if anyone supports or opposes this idea and has any input on the text. So take it away.
You know the drill. Straightforward one here. So any comments on this suggestion?
Just one question, Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire, NAC. Right now, 4-byte ASs, and I'd love the RIRs to confirm this, are completely and utterly clean in terms of which blocks which registries have. There's no fragmentation or segmentation within that block, unlike the 2-byte ASs, which are completely fragmented all over the place.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that is the case?
To my knowledge, except for the unusual exception of the block of 4-byte, which is actually the 2-byte, yes.
So I do support this, but not as written, because my concern is that what we are actually doing is, for the first time, we have something clean, and we're going to allow it to get unclean and broken.
But how would you propose? How would you propose correcting that?
Or 2-byte ASNs. Don't allow 4-byte.
Okay. Kevin, hold on. Mr. John?
So given clean 4-byte blocks out there us allocated with per RIR frameworks, how is that beneficial? I guess I'm just wondering, at some point, do you anticipate filtering on them, on those boundaries, or is this gross geolocation? I guess I just want to understand the benefit that's being achieved by maintaining that.
And here's a question. Do you anticipate any large operational impacts on the fragmentation of the database? With IANA and yourself?
No, but I just want to, if there's a purity benefit there, it needs to be described globally, because I can't say that you won't get transfers between any two RIRs globally. So I want to know what you're obtaining as a benefit.
By moving it to allow for inter-RIR transfers, we are going back to the discussion of, is this for vanity or is this a real reason to be doing it? There's a whole bunch of things that we can get into. The reality is this is clean. The 4 bytes are clean right now. There's no reason to recycle them today. I don't know if ARIN has a plan to recycle them, or once it's to an entity. We actually have a chance with the amount of 4 bytes there to not have to deal with who was on a 4 byte, where it was, which region it was. We know where it is today, and there is, I think, some thought and benefit to that. Might it matter? No. But I think we should have some discussion in that area.
Thank you very much. Jeff.
Jeff Houston, APNIC, neither for nor against this proposal, but I observe that sometimes when you walk on the beach and you kick what looks like a small rock, your foot gets broken, and when you start digging, it turns out to be a massive great boulder, and you've just done it. What do we do with transferred resources in general? Because IANA gave a block of something to one regional registry, and little bits drain over into other registries. And how do we track those little bits that they're gone from A and appear in B? Now, the reason why I ask this is we have been inconsistent. And in particular, in the 2-byte AS number sub-registry, at one stage, about 3 or 4 years ago now, we go back to IANA the records of all the detailed movements. So in theory, IANA knew not what it did, but what is at that time. Which AS number was in control by which registry. Whereas in the IPv4 and IPv6 addresses, when resources have moved, we have not done that. Now, you're about to go through the same sort of issue again when you talk about these transfers, and at least this time, eyes wide open. How do we, as a network of registries, record this kind of where is the resource, which registry is authoritative? Because currently there is no such map. Now, if you made IANA do this, let me talk about the boulder you've just kicked your foot into.
The painful boulder.
The painful boulder. Because over on the other side, we have this thing called RPKI. And RPKI needs to be accurate all of the time, right? Because if it isn't, really bad things happen to everything, because a little mistake means all your certs go invalid. So all of the time it has to be accurate. Over here you have 6 registries in, I think, 6 different time zones, each of which are doing updates at different times. So by design, those registries will be inconsistent when you're going up to IANA and back, which means by design, because of differing cycles on cert production, you're going to stuff at least 1/5 of the world in routing all of the time. So you don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. None of us want to do this. But what's the design principle when you're talking about moving resources, about understanding and tracking who's the authoritative registry? IANA is not perhaps the best answer, practically speaking, but we're talking about practicalities here, and the policy needs to be implemented, and just saying what we do now is not a good answer, because we don't really know what we do now consistently. So might I just have a plea that, unlike APNIC going, yeah, that's fine, you at least think about this problem and maybe say to your NRO folk or whatever, guys, get it together. Thank you.
I would be remiss if I did not let John.
Go back.
You thought you were escaping that easily.
So I have a question and then another question. My first question, from your soliloquy, I would take it to say that the assumption the bright RPKI folks will just figure that out is probably not a good assumption.
I'm pretty pessimistic that the bright RPKI folks are willing to dilute their security
Right.
framework.
Understood.
They would like perfection in the registries.
Yeah, I'm on CIDR now looking at the same draft.
Yeah, right.
So, okay. So, since we're all looking at the same thing, given that, that would say that it would be good to get some feedback to all the RIRs saying, hey, while Whois, or whatever you're using to publish this stuff, may let you punch holes and all cope with one another poorly, particularly, RPKI in particular doesn't. And I think if that information were related to the NRO, we could get it to our communities. But we need the RPKI wizards to explain, keep contiguous blocks at the IANA is a good thing.
Well, that's part of it, John, keep contiguous blocks at the IANA, because what you're really saying to IANA is record what you did. Right? Record your actions and that's it. Right. But at the RIRs, we've now got this problem of saying, if the registries reflect what is, we've got these holes being punched. How and where do we understand how people who use these registries, the consumers, navigate the twisty little paths of, well, Aaron got the block, but AP Nick has the instance. Right. And when you start talking about transfers, which is why I bring it up here, policy is fine, but implementation is everything. Right. And it's the implementation of this that is the nightmare.
Got it.
Shouldn't say nightmare, challenge.
Challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're running a tiny bit behind, which I know is a little different this morning, and we still have two proposals. So I'd ask if the remaining speakers could be succinct if possible, please. And if you wish to speak, please approach the mic clearly right now. Thank you.
Mike Joseph, Google. Support this policy. I think that, I will also observe that Jeff's comments and concerns notwithstanding, there's probably a need in the future to also look at a more generalized way of handling multinational M&A and restructuring between RIRs. And that's something that we should probably look at because that's going to be relevant even for IPv6 most likely, but certainly for ASNs. Nonetheless, as written, I support this policy.
Thank you. Last speaker.
David Farmer, University of Minnesota, Aaron AC. I support the policy. However, due to comments, I think we should, there's no burning need for this, so let's be cautious and let's figure it out before we put a stamp on it. But
okay.
One thing I would want to add is in the V4 world, we had this chant of registry accuracy, and that was what was paramount. And we had to have transfers in order to maintain registry accuracy. Why isn't that true of ASNs? It is. Just a question for people to think about.
Same reason it's not true for V6. In a world where you can go get another, okay, then the people who want it go get another, and it accurately reflects that. It's in the world where you can't readily go get another that you end up using someone else's.
That's only one piece of transfers.
Thank you. So seeing no further comments, we thank the community for this input, and we will move on to our next topic and try and catch up on time. Thank you.
Okay, next up we have the draft policy ARIN-2014-17, section 4.10, austerity policy update. And I will ask Dan to come up and do the presentation. Dan Alexander.
So section 410 of the policy manual, its intent was originally to facilitate transition technologies, in reality post-depletion. So people could continue to get a small block of V4 space after the free pool was depleted in order to deploy different transition technologies. This policy proposal suggests that maybe a better or maybe an alternate way of dealing with this is to mirror or copy what other RIRs are doing with an austerity approach, or rather than focusing on transition technologies, provide a mechanism to just give new entrants small blocks of V4 addresses in addition to the V6 blocks that they would be asking for. So there's three, I would say, key points to this proposal. One is the wording of it is limited to people who don't already have resources of a /22 or larger. So if you're a new entrant or you currently have a very small block, you could come back and use this policy to get a small allocation. The other piece to this is the original policy actually had a /10 set aside for this purpose. What this proposal also suggests is this pool would be fed by any blocks that ARIN gets as a result of the post-IANA depletion policy, where actually in the case that happened recently, ARIN received a /11, I believe, from IANA, and that's currently, I believe, on hold, waiting for the outcome of this policy to determine should that be added to the pool or not. So this is still in kind of the early stages since we've just gotten this proposal, but we're really looking for feedback of, one, is this a good idea? Do people agree with it? And even more detailed, do you believe that the pool for this should be fed by those IANA assignments? And are the blocks correctly sized? And should this be limited to new entrants, or should anybody be allowed to still obtain one of these small blocks? So, feedback welcome. Okay.
So you should stay up here too. Microphones are now open. I am chairing this as Paul had to step out. So front and center mic.
Andrew Dahl, ARIN AC, speaking for myself as the author of this proposal. I wrote this in collaboration with a number of other people at the end of the last meeting, trying to address the issues that were raised by ARIN staff about the after V4 run-out policy. So I believe this addresses a specific area of bootstrapping new entrants, none of whom are in this room. So the fact that people don't speak for this policy in this room is probably because they aren't here. And they may not even be on the mailing list at this point. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to take a larger look at how we, as a larger internet community, support people who don't know that they need to go to ARIN to get address spaces. I'd point out that similar policies in the RIPE and the APNIC region have been fairly successful at bringing new entrants directly to the registry and providing them with address spaces. And I believe we should learn from that model and adopt a similar policy. As the author, I am agnostic about the putting the IANA reclaimed into this block. If people don't want it, that's okay with me. I personally believe it should be there, but if people want to pull it out, that's okay. I thank you.
Okay. Next speaker.
Mike Joseph, Google. I oppose this policy. Fundamentally, I think that this policy seems to throw out the original intent of the idea of allowing for transition technology space. Yes, we're going to have some new entrants. We could carve out some type of soft landing for them and deplete our remaining V4 space quickly for the new entrants that come in the last few months and get a little bit more run rate out of our current space, but that's at the cost of taking what was intended to be in this earmarked nest egg for future transition purposes and making that no longer available. In the current form, it can last us quite some time for that additional space you happen to need to have that legacy V4 service on your otherwise V6 network. And instead, we're really just saying we're just gonna assign or allocate this space. It also incidentally encumbers, for example, the recent /11 that came back. So I think that actually, I think allowing that to become part of the regular pool, allowing people to continue to get space from that as normal, and keeping this protected for the original intended use is the most sensible thing to do. So I oppose this policy.
Is there any change to the policy that would allow you to support it? You note that it's draining from the transition pool. If this policy was purely for new entrants and only using the /11, would that change your view?
I see. So you're saying if we left the transition...
I'm asking, is there any change that would allow you to support
No, but
the
I mean, to
policy?
understand the hypothetical you posed, if the transition pool were left intact, but we said this 11 ought to be earmarked for new entrants.
For example.
Yeah, I think I would have to contemplate the specific policy language.
Okay.
I'm not really comfortable speaking on that hypothetical this time.
But right now, you don't know any hypothetical changes that would allow you to support it.
I have not conceived of such hypotheticals as yet.
Okay. Okay. I generally ask people at the mic who don't support if there's any changes that would let them. So, okay, next. Thank you.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire, NAC. We are putting together three distinct issues. We have austerity, we have IANA return, and we have transition. And by commingling them so much together, we are going to basically do negative things to all of them. Yes, John, I believe that this should be a completely separate section, completely separate pool that has nothing to do with transition, leave transition alone until we actually get into a phase where we need to drain down the transition pool and we can see what happens with that and write policies with that in that regard. I don't like the idea of overflowing the bathtub from IANA returns continually till the cows come home. If you want to fill the bathtub the first time from IANA, great. But I really don't believe that it should be solely used for new entrants. I think that's unfair to the rest of the community. Give the new entrants their initial block, and then, like everything else, it will drain down over time as is needed. So I believe overall that, yes, I do support something in this area, but I believe it should be its own separate area that can be very easily looked at and dealt with by the community.
Okay, thank you. Next.
David Huberman from Microsoft strongly support this policy. You have to understand that if you look at the history of ARIN allocations, about 85% of the address space goes to about 10 companies. Okay? The large networks in this region use almost all the address space. And it's been very unfair to small providers for a very long time, the way the rules are structured, especially ISPs, who have to be of a certain size with space from their ISPs to get space from ARIN. It's been inequitable for 15 years, I assert, okay? And with that in mind, I come to the mic saying, well, of course we should do this. And not only should we do this, we should have done this a long time ago. Large providers, large networks who are drawing down almost all the space today don't need to draw down any more space as we reach exhaustion. Let's save all we can for the smaller folks who are trying so hard just to survive. Not make them come to us, I'm not an ISP, but not make them come to the ISPs and be hooked into an ISP, because that's the only place you can get address space. And transition technologies isn't real right now. Nobody, how many allocations have we made out of the transition technology /10? None.
Not
Zero.
One,
right?
None.
Oh,
A
there were
few. Yeah. Yeah.
2 or 3?
A few.
A few.
Yeah, a few.
Well, you were holding up a /10, which is a lot of space. And as we get new space from the IANA, the /11, and the rest of these things about filling the bucket, I think they ought to go to the folks who have the hardest time. And it's not the big guys.
Okay. Next up.
Scott Librand, ARIN-AC, Twitter. First, I want to channel something Leif just said on PPML. He was trying to be on Jabber but couldn't. So he said that he opposes this proposal. He says the whole point of the /10 was to provide transition space that did not overlap existing RFC 1918/3330 space. He would support a separate austerity policy for new IANA reclaim and deploys.
Okay.
Back with my own hat on, the history here of soft landing is kind of interesting. I've been around long enough to remember the discussions around whether we should have a soft landing pool. We decided something different than most of the other RIRs did. It's possible that the success of their policies would mean that maybe we did the wrong thing and we should do something like they did. I'm worried that we are being overtaken by events, though, and it's too late to make a good course change there. The path we did choose to take, very much like what Leif just said, was to use this space to make it possible for new entrants to do IPv6. This proposal eliminates that incentive for people to be able to get space if they're using it for v6 transition. I think that is contrary to the spirit of the original reservation and is less than ideal. If we were to have a separate block for new entrants that just needed v4 space for having v4 space, I wouldn't be opposed to that. I'm not sure we can get that done in time. So I think we need to be careful that we're not saying that we must do this in order for new entrants to be able to get space. I think the alternative that we were thinking would probably be more likely at the time we made the policy we've got is that people who need v4 space solely for v4 purposes will be able to get it from the transfer market. So I wonder if maybe what we should be doing here is, instead of trying to chase a very dwindling free pool, is to be making it easier for small entrants to get space via transfer with as little difficulty as possible, and that, I think, will address most of their business need.
So
opposed as written, would not be opposed if it were a separate pool, but am skeptical that can be done in time.
Okay. I'm closing the microphones. Remote participants, final comments? Okay. Excellent discussion. This will be provided to the AC. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Now I'm back. Okay, so last policy proposal. ARIN 2014-17, change utilization requirements from last allocation to total aggregate. We're going to do this promptly, and then we're going to be done. Andrew, come on up.
Okay, so I got to start everything off, and I guess I get to finish it off today. So this is about, came from Leif from Alaska, and he basically postulated that the problem here is that because of some math issues around how allocations are being examined at this point, is that there are specific cases where organizations aren't being able to get the next block that they need because they're slightly below the 80% utilization in one block, but overall they're using everything up. So that's the problem. And how he proposes to change that is that instead of looking at the last block at the 80% mark, he's proposing to change it to look at the 80% mark over all of the allocations that, that an ISP is and end user has. So basically this would, for larger organizations with multiple blocks, greatly lower the bar for organizations to obtain new address blocks. One open question that has not been readily addressed at the draft policy at this point is how this would impact the existing utilization requirements that are in the multiple discrete networks policy. So that's one of the things that we are looking for feedback on. If the multiple discrete networks policy should be changed with regard to this or not, or just ignore it, because it's unclear how the two of these would probably interact at this point. So the questions that we have at this point is, do you think that the current utilization requirements are fair, and do they need to be changed? Secondly, do you think this draft addresses that issue at this point? And we are looking for feedback on this to decide whether to abandon this or to continue work on it. At this point, the policy has a few people supporting it, but not a lot, and not really anyone calling for it to be abandoned, but the support is very narrow so far. So without continued support, the AC would likely look toward abandoning this policy.
What are we talking about? No. I'm just So microphones are open for discussion on this topic. I do have to read the bullet points at least, but okay. Very new on the list, we realize, but I see, no, maybe? Oh. Sir.
Hello, Chris Rogers with Inter-RIR. Being a small ISP, I do support the policy, the concept behind it. However, given that this would have the opposite effect for larger networks, allowing them to get additional prefixes more frequently, I think. I do oppose as written, but I would support if there were undecided yet wording changes.
Any specific changes that you could enumerate right now just to help the shepherds?
Offhand, no, but I'd be happy to take care of that on the list.
David Farmer, University of Minnesota Aaron AC. I support the concept. There's a lot of work need to be done on it yet. One possible suggestion would be, I'm concerned about removing the current utilization mechanisms. I don't see a good reason to change it for the people that works for. What I might suggest is an additional total aggregate and set that a little bit higher, like let's say 85%, is just sort of off the top of my head what I've been thinking.
Okay. Thank you. If you would like to discuss on this topic, I'd ask you to approach to a mic because we're coming to the end of our time.
Mike Joseph, Google. I support this policy. To address a couple comments, Mr. Farmer may not be aware that ARIN's current practice actually changed recently. RSD no longer looks at 80% of all blocks, which may be what you were alluding to in an aggregate utilization of 85. In fact, RSD looks at 80% of the most recent block and much higher utilization of all previous blocks. And that wasn't ARIN's practice until the past year or so. So that's an interesting point that actually would suggest that a more generous interpretation, I think, might be favorable in some cases. So the other thing I'd comment on is the question was raised in one of the other slides, I think, concerning what to do about 4.5. And I would offer a suggestion that this policy also be extended to apply to 4.5.5. I think the policy authors correctly observe that nothing would be changing in 4.5.4, but I think one could see that 4.5.5, which specifies that each location, that each block at each location would need to be used at 80%. I would think that the same concept that applies for an overall AS ought to be applied within each MDN as well. And so I think that's sensible there. But overall, to the point, I think that one could envision some type of protection for abuse, but overall, I think that might be a welcome change to support averaging of previous blocks.
Andrew, any comment? I saw nodding. Yep. Okay, nodding. Some agreement. So microphones are going to be closed unless I see a body popping up. Microphones are closed. Kevin?
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire, and AC. Just a clarification to start with. Yeah. So we're writing a policy to put back to status quo the way staff would handle numbers from 12 to 18 months ago. Was this part of an communication or?
So if you read the present policy says fully utilized and 80% for your last block. Mm. That's what we strive to implement. In the past, it had been determined that we were not always checking the fully utilized in the past. okay? And now we do a much better job of that. It's an improvement to make sure we're doing things according to the policy text. I believe it might have even been in a policy experience report, but we're implementing it as it's presently written. By the way, fully utilized is very difficult, okay? One address missing out of a /18 somewhere means you don't get your next block. So we try to say fully utilized as fully as practical. There's no addresses that can possibly be reallocated or moved to use. So it doesn't work out to 100% for all previous blocks. It works out to very high utilization and 80% for the most recent. So we're implementing the current policy text. We may not have had the rigor that we needed in the past.
John, it's efficiently utilized, not fully utilized.
Efficiently utilized.
Although it's true that these days RSD seems to take that to mean nearly fully utilized.
Right.
So having said that, I support this, and I will say this. As a smaller ISP, the smaller the box you get from ARIN, the bigger the jigsaw puzzle that you have to deal with, the less possible it is to hit fully utilized or anything close to that. So going back to what I have been doing historically, which is utilizing as best I can, but making sure overall I was over 80% when I went back to ARIN, especially with my last block, should be the de facto standard.
Okay.
Thank you, and thank you for that comment. That will, I believe, end this draft policy that's a little bit new, so thank you for that feedback. And that ends our policy consultation. Thanks for all the input today. I'll turn over to John to close.
Thank you. Okay. Hopefully this has been great input for the AC to consider and stimulate discussion. I'd like to welcome everyone and for attending today. It's been very helpful. We're going to have a joint meeting with Nanog in Baltimore, ARIN 34, and it will be Baltimore the 9th and 10th in October, where you'll get to see all these policies, or the ones that aren't abandoned, between at that meeting. That's it. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of the meeting.